It's a great pleasure to have Fabio Sattin here. Fabio Sattin has an incredible experience within the private equity market. He founded Private Equity Partner, a great company operating in the private equity sector. He was the chairman of the European Private Equity Venture Capital Association. He's a great professor here at Bocconi on private equity. So, Fabio, what is today the state of the art of private equity venture capital all around the world? It's a huge question, I know. But coming to your experience.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for your introduction. To NICE. Yes, today the situation is quite interesting for private equity. Many things are changing. And I still believe that today, more than in the previous year, private equity is a very important engine for the economic growth, especially for Europe in particular. All over the world, but also for Europe and also for Italy. But let's speak about Europe. I think today one of the key problems we may have in Europe is the great presence of the banking system. As you know, the big difference between Europe and US is the importance that banks have on, intermediating, money between a corporation and savings. And I think there is a huge need of creating new financial intermediary, not banking-related financial intermediaries, having, let me say, fundamental skills that have having a specific knowledge on companies, on development program. And I think private equity players is a category that has developed throughout many years in Europe those kind of skills, which are today very important. So I think that private equity in the various form of private equity will be very important for European growth. Today, I think we should include also in private equity also what we call private debt. As you know, a lot of private equity companies are also developing a private debt activity. So I think overall is a very important sector for the European growth.
So Europe and US seems to be two different stories. So it's what you mentioned before. Are really two different stories when we talk about private equity?
Let me say yes. There is a kind of European way to private equity, and I always remember the ambassador of Italy coming from US, Mr. Spogli. Used to be a huge player in the US private equity market. And when he arrived in Italy and in Europe, he understood that it was a different market. Why that? Because Europe is a country with a lot of family-owned company. In Europe, private equity, except in UK, has developed throughout different, let's say, routes. In many cases, private equity are in a minority position supporting entrepreneurs in developing their company. So it's a different manner to approach private equity. In Europe, we have a lot of minority investment, so-called growth capital investment. So I think that private equity has adapted in Europe and also within Europe in each specific country, because you have also country by country differences, and certainly is different compared to the traditional private equity in US. I was working in US before coming in Europe, so it was a huge difference in the approach. And let me say that especially in continental Europe, private equity players played a very important role in supporting companies, supporting generational change. So yes, there is a different manner to approach private equity, and I think in Europe is quite a sound manner.
What are the key trends of the private equity industry today?
Today is a moment of change in private equity, certainly. After 2009, after the crisis, as many other sectors, also private equity had to review a little bit the strategy. First of all, there is a problem at fundraising level. I think the traditional fund structure are a little bit struggling as of today. We see a lot of new investment structure coming out, like club deals, co-investment, direct investment, SPAC, special purpose acquisition, a lot of different structures which are adapting themselves to the needs of the market and to the investors. Another big problem is the fee structure. The traditional fee structures are mainly based on fee calculated on committed capital is not anymore so popular, let me say that way. More and more investors, they want to, pay fees on the invested amount, okay? And a lot of funds are also reviewing the fee structure in order also to match this new requirement. On the other hand, we have a lot of sovereign funds which are starting to invest directly into companies. So the largest investors are not anymore going through the private equity player, but they are going directly in the market or via co-investment agreements. So a lot of changes in the investment structures. On the deal, is always the same. The key target in Europe are SMEs, statistically. In Europe, we have approximately 45 billion invested each year out of 5,500 companies. And the attitude of entrepreneur of involving private equity players on their strategy is increasing. Probably we will do private equity in the future with different structures, with different economic conditions, but in a larger amount, including also, as I said before, private debt that still also in Europe being an important area of the private equity market.
So the industry is changing, so new strategies, you mentioned private debt, also different stories, so majority investment in US, minority in a certain sense in continental Europe. We don't have the crystal ball, but how do you see the market in terms of strategic choices taken by the major players or the relevant players, as you are, for example, in the market?
Certainly one of the key elements is that in Europe you don't have deal of a large dimension, first. Second, minority probably, as I said before, will still, are a great part of the market. Probably now, I think from the investor's point of view and from the private equity firm point of view, so they have to increase their industrial skills. So a lot of private equity houses are adding to their traditional staff also industry experts in order to increase the industrial know-how. Let me take that, but let me be precise on this point. I personally do not believe, I do not think that private equity has to substitute to management. Private equity investor is an active owner, is not an active manager. So, just to be clear, the role of the private equity investor is an active investor, active shareholder roles. You have not to overlap with the management. But even if you are an active investors, an active shareholders, is absolutely necessary to increase the understanding of the company, of the sector, in order to really help company in developing and deploying their development strategy. So even taking, let's say, staying in its own role, don't overlapping with the management, but even with this role, I think to increase, let's say, the industrial know-how is very important. That is one of the key elements for the future of private equity.
Thank you very much, Fabio. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you to you.